I've loved Tribit speakers and audio for a long while. In fact, they make one of my favourite small portable speakers of all time, the Tribit Stormbox, which I reviewed maybe around 5 years ago when it was originally called the Max Boom. I even took that thing for a little swim in the sea. And then I did the same with the Stormbox Pro, although that was during lockdown, which meant that I didn't have access to the sea. So I had to replace that with a hot tub. But either way, the common thing between them both is that I rate both of those speakers highly. And now, Tribit have released an updated version of their larger speaker, the Stormbox Blast. The Stormbox Blast 2. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to revisit Tribit and see what they've been up to. And it would appear that they've been up to witchcraft. From a spec perspective, it's had a serious boost in almost every way when comparing it to the previous generation Stormbox Blast. For starters, the sound when on battery has been doubled from 90 watts to 180 watts. And if you have the Blast 2 plugged into the power, it'll squeeze an extra 20 watts out of it, taking it to a ridiculous 200 watt output. Now there's a massive 80 watt subwoofer, two 45 watt mid-range drivers and two 15 watt silk dome tweeters, which for a speaker this size is pretty impressive. But despite the huge increase in output, Tribit quote that the battery life is still 30 hours, which is impressive, although obviously battery is very, very dependent on how you're listening to it. So if you've got it on full blast, it will last less than the quoted time. I think they say that that's on mid output with none of the kind of X bass and other fancy stuff you can turn on. And I found that when being quite conservative, it does last about 30 hours, maybe just slightly under, but again, it all depends on how you're using it. Now it can charge by both USB-C and AC too, which is interesting, and taking a look at the back you'll notice a slew of new dials and inputs, which I'll come back to later on. But from a design perspective, it's definitely reminiscent of the first gen, but distinctively different enough so that you can tell them apart. It still has a really rugged style, which has been ideal because I've been using it as a speaker at my new house that I've just bought and trying to renovate, so it's been knocked about a little bit this week, and you wouldn't be able to tell, it's done extremely well. The silhouette, though, sort of reminds me a little bit of the old Bowers & Wilkins Zeppelin speaker, if you squint your eyes enough. But it's certainly more rounded than the previous one. In itself, the speaker isn't actually rounded, it's just this giant kind of sweeping curve on the top that creates that effect, and I quite like it. It gives it a slightly more friendly appearance, even if it is larger than the predecessor. And because it's slightly larger, it's had a bit of a revamp of the lighting as well, featuring a large central light and two satellite lights on the side, along with the two exterior bars on either side here, which were popular in the last one. Although this time they're completely smooth, these bars, rather than having that kind of gradient stepped lighting and individual segments. But again, I'll come back to that shortly because I want to show you just what this thing is capable of. So let me take you back, like I always do, to a few weeks ago when I unboxed it for the first time and turned it on to give you an idea of my first impressions of the Stormbox Blast 2 experience. Right, we're going to get a bit more intimate today. Bit of a closer view of my face. Oh, that's heavier than I thought it was going to be. Oh my god. We've got this. Oh, this is a heavy boy. Good grief. Oh, look at this. This is a chunky piece of kit. Let's turn it on. Ooh, we've got all the lights on the front as well, so these are a slightly revamped lighting design from the previous one. Looks quite nice. I like the lighting effects going off. let's try something else. Oh, that's much crisper. Very good. We're about 70% volume. That's very loud as well. Let's turn the X bass on. Ooh, that bass has just suddenly gone up a notch. It's basically what a lot of Tribit speakers have, and it's fantastic. Let's crank it right up. Oh, that's too loud for in here, far too loud. Well, let's turn it down a little bit. I've got to say, this is a lovely looking device from Tribit, and it's got that typical signature Tribit appearance as well, with all the buttons on the top, the kind of sweeping angled handle. It's just very Tribit. But obviously, I think I'm going to go and have to give this a listen with some different audio over the next week and see exactly what it's like and how it performs. Initial impressions, though, is that it is very much a Tribit speaker. It kind of follows the same audio tone. Quality-wise, it feels the same. And I'm excited to give this a go. So let me skip back into the future and tell you what I think of it after a few weeks of use. So, now, what can I say after a few weeks? Well, originally I was blown away by the sheer power of it, and now I'm really enjoying the ability of this to retain a good clarity, and it's got a slight hint of that Tribit warmth that I liked about the smaller Stormbox and Stormbox Pro. Now, we all know with great power, though, comes great big responsibility, but does the Tribit Stormbox Blast 2 handle its power? Well, I can safely say that it seems to do a fantastic job throughout most of its range. Perhaps around the 90% mark, you do start to lose some clarity, especially in the highs, but this is to be expected. Generally, you won't be using it past 80 anyway, because this thing is loud. Perhaps if I was to be very, very critical, it might be a bit more even sounding. Certainly dampened that sound signature that I really loved in the previous generation and in the Stormbox and Stormbox Pro. Now, I think some people will prefer that, and some people might not, because sound is obviously preference and taste, and it's very subjective. But trying to be objective, it certainly is a bit more balanced than previous Tribit speakers, and seemingly performs well across multiple different styles of audio that I've been listening to since I unboxed it. But obviously, sound, like I said, is massively subjective, and everyone has different tastes and profile preferences. Now, you can actually change the sound profile slightly with a button on the speaker itself, which is the reoccurring X-Bass feature, which has been in everything I've tried. Now, this makes things sound fuller and richer and deeper and punches the bass out a lot more. For me, I tend to leave the X-Bass on because it suits my sound preferences a lot more and really does create a punch, which is especially prevalent on this speaker because of its size. But if this isn't enough customization, there is a connected app which lets you do a little bit more. You're first presented with a bunch of equalization presets that change the sound profile based on the selection. There's one in particular that's worth noting, which is the X3D mode. This changes the sound profile to throw the audio out a little bit and make the experience more immersive by creating a more 3D soundstage that uses your space a little bit better. It is pretty decent and seems to work quite well, and if you're predominantly using it indoors, it's probably the setting I'd recommend using. But if none of these suit, then there are the ability to create your own profiles, if you know what you're doing, of course. This isn't the only thing you can do in the app, of course. You can also control the RGB lighting on the speaker, and actually, they've given the user perhaps the most control I've seen so far on a Boombox type speaker. You can control the light bars, the middle light, and the two satellite lights separately, controlling their colours and choosing if they react to bass, treble, or just stay fixed. You've also got an individual brightness control too, which is another little sprinkle of sugar on this already robust control. Honestly, I don't think I've seen a Bluetooth connected speaker, Boombox style anyway, with this level of RGB customization. So if that's your cup of tea, I can say without question that right now, there's probably none better than it. But let's go back now to the inputs on the back, because this is an interesting feature here that has two 6.35 inputs for wired microphones, along with independent adjustment volume control and reverb control for use as either a loudspeaker for events or, if you're feeling brave, karaoke. Now, I did think about doing my own rendition of Phantom of the Opera from start to finish in this episode just to demonstrate this fact, but I realise that will be a little bit long, and I'll spare your ears because although my voice has been described as the voice of an angel, it's the angel of death that it's often being compared to. These, of course, are highly unnecessary for most people, but with this addition, it does make this perhaps among the most versatile of Boombox speakers that we've tested so far, with utility beyond just being a music device. I just own no karaoke microphones to test it. So if you have tested that feature, let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, there are a couple of points that I think are worth noting. The first being that it is much heavier than the previous generation, weighing in at just shy of 9 kilograms. I mean, it absolutely has to, of course, because of the sheer amount of power that this has. If it were any lighter, it'd probably just start levitating and shoot off embedding into your wall. But this is still very heavy compared to the first gen, which was just over 5 kilograms. This means that if you are lugging it around, you might want to consider the distance you have to lug it for. But another thing I'd have loved to have seen in this would have been a little bit more control over the smart lighting. Considering that this has so much customization, it would have been quite nice to have been able to plug this into the AC and being able to pair this up to my Wi-Fi network, for example, so that I've got control over my smart home and the lights in it rather than just being Bluetooth through the app. It's not a deal breaker, of course, but I've yet to see a manufacturer create a speaker like this with some form of permanent smart home control for when you are on your home Wi-Fi. So if any manufacturers are watching this, you know what you need to do to get ahead. But even still, the light control is ahead of other options by quite a bit, to give credit where credit is due. It's safe to say that it's winning with a few of those specific features, that's for sure. But what about the price? Well, when I checked, it was £253, which is, well, pretty reasonable. I think it's about right, the price. I wouldn't go ahead and say that it's unbeatable value, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's priced too high. I think they've gone and pulled a bit of a Goldilocks and put it just right. To simply put it, I just think it's a really solidly built device with versatile functionality and a few things that make it stand out from others on the market. And it is a real upgrade over the previous generation. So in my eyes, once again, Tribit gets my seal of approval with the Stormbox Blast 2. But what do you guys think? Have you already got a Boombox style speaker? If so, what are you using? Let us know in the comments below so we can all have a good chinwag about it. But other than that, guys, make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe button, and I'll see you back for another episode of STU'S Reviews soon. But I better get back to renovating the house because it's not going to do it itself. Let's bring the speaker.